suffer from tight, achy, stiff, or sore hips? Are you looking for more ways to stretch them and get some relief? My name is Dr. Robin Armstrong, and today we're going to go into a deep dive all about stretching your hip rotators, your glutes, your piriformis, anything surrounding the outside or back of the hips. Now, I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but I want you to hold these stretches for at least 30 seconds and do each side. Even if you have one hip that's more tight than the other, try to even out and do both sides. So let's start with a pretty straightforward one. We're going to gradually kind of get deeper and deeper as we go. So lying on your back, I like to do just a hug of the knee into the chest. Now, this isn't going to feel like much of a stretch, but we're lengthening the muscles that attach into the hip. So more connective tissue, fascia, getting into the glutes this way. And then a slight variation, you're going to cross your leg towards your shoulder, but try to keep your low back on the ground. So we're not coming into a full spinal twist. We're just angling the hip. So now we're getting a little bit more into the glute max. Again, this is just a subtle stretch, but a nice way to start. This can also be done in a seated position, crossing one leg over, sitting up tall, hugging the thigh in, and you can add a bit of a twist, and then you'll feel it through the outside of the hip. Going a little deeper, we can do a figure four stretch. So we're going to cross one ankle over the knee. We're going to grasp under the thigh. You can also use a towel or a strap to pull the thigh towards you. And we're imagining the bent knee leg opening out to the side. So as you gently pull in with the thigh, you're imagining that hip rotating out, holding in here. So now we're getting a little bit more into the piriformis as well as the glutes. And the nice variation that I like from this one is to tilt your hips over to the side so that the foot comes to the floor. Keep the knee pointing up towards the sky. Raise the arm overhead, and you're going to get a nice stretch all the way through the outside of the hip. So now we're actually getting into the TFL, or the tensor fasciae latae, maybe in the glute medius, and you'll feel it coming up into the fascia and the connective tissue of the low back. So I like this one. A further variation is then you can tightly cross the legs and then come into a twist like this. So now we're going to get a little bit more into the spine and into the hips as well. Going even deeper, we can go into pigeon pose. Now, I do recommend that you warm up a little bit before you get into this because it can be quite deep. And if you're having problems with your sacroiliac joint, then just be careful because it is a deep stretch and the body finds a way of getting movement. So if it's not getting it in the hips, it's going to go into your low back or your SI joint. So I like to enter from all fours. You're going to slide your right knee forward so that's coming towards your right hand. The ankle can stay close to the back thigh. I like to stretch out my back leg. Now, the closer it is to the back thigh, the easier it is. If you want to get a bit harder, you're moving it further towards 90 degrees. My hips are tight. I'm going to keep it fairly close. And then we're going to imagine trying to sink both hips, both sitting bones almost, closer to the ground. Now, added bonus, if you stay up high, you get a psoas stretch, our hip flexor. But then when we fold down, we're really going to start to feel it through the outside of that hip. Breathe here. Try to imagine the hips sinking and melting into the floor. And then slowly finding your way back up. Another variation of pigeon is called square pigeon, where it's like a cross-legged pose where you put one leg in front of you like this, and then cross your other ankle on top of the thigh. Now, the tighter your hips are, the more that knee is going to be sticking up into the air. This is my tight side, which I clearly need to stretch. So we're going to start to fold forward, and it might just be a little bit before you start to feel an opening through the top hip. And then you would change sides. So the hip on top is the one that's getting stretched. The square pigeon. A variation of this, not quite as intense, is just to cross your legs, one foot in front of the other, and then you're actually going to fold away from the front foot. So right now my left foot is in front. I'm going to fold over to my right. And again, this gets a little bit more into the outside or the side of the hip, stretching up into the side body too even. So I like these poses where we get more of a stretch that gets a few different areas that might explain why our hips are tight, because maybe it's not just our hip, maybe it's also our waist and the muscles of our back or our lats even. And then you would change sides. Stretch the right hip, I would fold to the left. So there's so many different variations of hip stretches and yoga poses you can do to loosen up your hips. This was a deep dive into a few of the ones you can do. Knee to your chest, crossing the knee across your body, figure four pose, then going into a bit of a twist with that figure four position, then pigeon pose, seated square pigeon, or that seated forward fold. We post regular content under Willowbrook Chiropractic on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. If you have any questions of any of these poses or stretches that I went over here today, please feel free to ask myself, Dr. Robin Armstrong, or Dr. Jody Freedman. To book online, you can book at willowbrookchiropractic.com. We're always happy to help.